Okay, we're going to try something a little bit different today and see how this goes. So, those who know me know that my main area of expertise, such that it is in the philosophy of mind and neuroscience of consciousness. Maybe philosophy of science, psychology more generally. But I have interests that range far outside of that, although that's not the area that I publish in or that I like specialize in uh, professionally. But I am interested in the philosophy of religion, and those who know may have even read some of my stuff on Philosophy Sucks, my blog, and also various podcasts that I show up in. In fact, there's a podcast I recently did where some of this will be talked about. So I do have interest in that area. And I have a personal history, which I sometimes talk about, but which maybe is relevant to these issues. So those who know me maybe are familiar with my background, know that I was raised in a very religious household by a single parent, my mother, who I describe as a kind of seeker, a spiritual seeker. She was really searching to find a place, some kind of place that she felt mirrored or matched her pre-theoretical or intuitive ideas about what is divine and the nature of this sort of stuff. So she took us to various religious institutions as me and my sister when we were children. And I can't remember every place that we went to, but there was a Pentecostal Church of the Nazarene, Baha'i Faith. We went to a synagogue. Um, there was Seventh Day Adventist, Unitarianism, various places, until finally she met and talked to some Jehovah's Witnesses, and that's where she found her home. So from the very early age, I was forced to read the Bible and to go to these things, and I was always very skeptical. My natural reaction was one of just kind of disbelief in the character portrayed in especially the Old Testament, but also the New Testament. But the character portrayed there just intuitively struck me as all too human in Nietzsche's phrase, a turn of phrase, but also just really immoral, verging on probably evil. And as I've joked about in previous places, if I had met such a creature in real life, I would want to organize the resistance or be a part of that resistance because I just could not believe that this was kind of loving, all knowing, or powerful kind of being that they were describing at all. So when I say things like this, people have said to me that I sound like a Gnostic or that I'd be at home with the Gnostics. And in fact, on this podcast I was on, this came up again where this guy mentioned the Gnostics. And, I've had some classes in grad school. I had a class on the history of Christian thought, and I had a class on the Bible as literature, but really it was Bible as philosophy. And we'd read a lot of the Luke Acts kind of stuff, dealing with the Greek philosophers and talking about Neoplatonism and stuff like that. So I've had that, I mean, not extensive. I had 2 or 3 classes on this stuff, but I've been interested in this stuff for a very long time. I have my own distinctive views, and I've often portrayed myself as an agnostic about the whether there is the existence of an all-powerful, all-knowing, morally perfect creator of the world that we live in. But I also am not an agnostic about the particular religions of the world. I find them all to be the products of mankind, and I never really I've considered myself an atheist about all of the known religions of mankind, but an agnostic about this more general question: is there some kind of all-knowing, all-powerful, morally perfect force in the universe from which the stuff that we have around here originates? Okay, interesting. And also, I've kind of recently been thinking about the simulation hypothesis a lot, and I came to the realization that most of the arguments that we have for the existence of traditionally theist gods are better arguments for the simulation hypothesis. So that if you take them all together, the problem of evil combined with the reasons that suggest there's a designer, suggest that there's kind of an imperfect designer or not a morally perfect one at least. And that's more consistent with the simulation hypothesis. So I have come to think that the only real argument for the existence of the traditional theistic God is the ontological argument. Okay, so maybe this is why people have thought of me as kind of being friendly to Gnosticism, because I, on the one hand, am seeing in the traditional text of our religions on earth, a being that I don't recognize as something that I would consider morally perfect, all knowing, or all powerful. But at the same time, I am agnostic about the existence of such things. So maybe that's where this is coming from. And I never really thought too much about it until recently I decided, well, okay, maybe I'll look into Gnosticism a bit. And I came to learn some stuff about it more than I knew actually, and about the various traditions, and that there's interesting distinctions and interesting ways that you can think about this. But it got me to think about this simulation argument in a new way, because one of the responses that people have traditionally given to my saying that we have more reason to think that we live in a simulation, that the traditional God of the Bible is real. One of the responses that people have given to me is that, well, the simulator, if there is one, has to live in a place where things are real, and there's got to be an explanation for those things. And so maybe there is even if you sort of admit that the God of this world could be the simulator, the creator of this world is the simulator, then there's some further God of the external world that more matches this, the omni, having these omni properties. And I started thinking that does sound a lot like Gnosticism. So if you think of the creator of this world as a mere, being in the next world up, and they're imperfect in various ways, and maybe even downright not great, then you can think, well, maybe the true God is not the one that's portrayed in these texts, which is the creator of this realm, but maybe this further being, which is beyond all of that stuff. And then you could kind of reinterpret all of the Gnosticism in terms of this further monad, the one beyond being, or whatever, this thing that's outside of the simulation, and also the creator of whatever is outside of the simulation. If we are, remember, I'm not saying we are in a simulation, but I'm saying that if you take these arguments about there being a designer seriously, that I think that they better support the simulation hypothesis once you take into consideration the problem of evil. So, okay, so then am I a Gnostic then? Well, no, I do think that this way of thinking about things is interesting and makes better sense of the kind of empirical evidence, and people's ideas about this are interesting. But I still think you have the same sort of reasons for being agnostic about this transcendent, not creator of our world, but this kind of perfect love, or all powerful, all knowing, morally perfect sort of being. And that's the same sort of reasons that I think that you always have in these areas for a stalemate. So on the one hand, the only evidence that we have for this being would be something like the ontological argument, and people are not often moved by that. And if they are, I would say the best that you can get out of the ontological argument is kind of a rational justification of your own views, but not a convincing of someone who didn't hold that. And I myself, I'm not sure if this concept of this perfect being makes sense, which is why I think Gnosticism relies not on a kind of abstract knowledge of this thing, but a knowing of it in a more direct way, which is a different kind of knowledge as far as I can tell. So I do think that this clarifies my position, because I was thinking that maybe thinking about the simulation hypothesis had made me more atheistic and less agnostic. But I do think that actually it does change. It doesn't do that, but it changes the balance a little bit, because it separates out in my thinking the difference between the morally perfect kind of all-knowing, all-powerful, all-loving being, and the creator of this world, which I had seen as kind of going together. So Gnosticism clearly gives you a way to separate those two, saying that the creator of this world might not be the morally perfect, all-knowing, all-powerful being, which is somehow the source of everything in a more general sense. So the once you separate the evidence for there being a creator of the stuff around us from that other thing, then the evidence supports the simulation hypothesis. But as far as this other thing is concerned, what evidence is there really for it? Well, as I said, we have the ontological argument. We have issues about the concept of it being coherent, and whether there is such a thing like that. And maybe we have these more directly religious experiences or something like that count, but I've also been skeptical of those. So I guess I'm a little less agnostic, I would say, about this kind of. By the way, I still find it possible that maybe there is no creator of the world around us, but I just think that there's some evidence that there is. That evidence is best explained by simulation hypothesis rather than the theistic hypothesis. The question of whether there is this other being, then what evidence really is there in support of that? Well, maybe that there's got to be some source for everything if you really believe this, although I think you can argue around that. The ontological argument, as we've already said. So whether you think you come out agnostic or atheistic about this other element is largely going to depend on how you interpret these sources of evidence. And so for myself, I'm somewhat skeptical about them. And I find myself sort of leaning more towards thinking, yeah, I don't think so, while still keeping open the possibility of myself being wrong. So I guess that I still am technically agnostic about this more transcendent thing, but leaning more towards wondering what the positive evidence for it is. Interesting. So I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about that. Let me know. I'm curious about these ideas um, and what you think about them.